All right, let's explore the history of the Philippines. We're covering centuries of culture, big battles, and how it became the nation it is today.
Yeah, and it's a story that really pushes back on those oversimplified narratives we hear sometimes. We'll see a civilization thriving before Europeans ever showed up, with unique ways of governing themselves, trade networks all over, and even, get this, a floating city.
A floating city, huh? All right, now I'm definitely intrigued. Let's back up a bit, though. What was the Philippines like before all that, pre-colonial times?
Okay, so picture the Philippines centuries before Magellan. It was like a crossroads of cultures and ideas, not isolated tribes just waiting to be discovered. These were advanced societies already, dealing with big players like China and Japan.
So not just trading goods, they were trading ideas, too.
Whoa, absolutely. Take the Majas Confederation in the Visayas region. This wasn't just some random group of villages. They had a system for leadership where datas or chiefs would team up, settle disagreements, even had laws.
Wow, so real governance, not just scattered settlements. That changes things.
Yeah, exactly. And their influence wasn't limited to their own islands either. There's signs they even raided Chinese coastal cities. These were serious seafarers, projecting power across the region.
Visayans taking on China. That's definitely not the usual story. What about trade in those days? What was that like?
Trade was booming. In Pangasinan, there was a spot called the Port of Japan, where you'd find locals wearing silks from both Japan and China. They were using porcelain jars, just like those found across Asia. And get this, they thought blackened teeth were the thing, considered foreigners' white teeth to be like animals.
Blackened teeth. That's wild. It's amazing how these early connections changed even small details of life.
It really shows how linked they were to the rest of the world. And speaking of connections, we can't skip over Islam coming to the Philippines.
Right. People like Sheriff Kabumsuan had a huge impact introducing and spreading Islam, creating those powerful sultanates we talked about.
And even before Kabunsuan, the Bruneian Empire was pushing its influence, especially in the north and south of the islands. They brought political power, of course, but also their culture and religious practices. It's important to remember that Raja Salalila, the ruler of Manila in the 16th century, was Muslim, and his dynasty was a direct challenge to the older ruling family of Lakandula in Tondo.
So it was this mix of internal power struggles and outside forces shaping religion even before the Spanish showed up.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about conquest either. Traders and those spreading the Islamic faith from places like Malaysia and Indonesia, they had a big role too. So by the time the Spanish arrived, Islam was well established, particularly in the south.
Okay, so we've got this picture of a dynamic, connected archipelago with trade routes, complex politics, and a mix of religions. And then, boom, Ferdinand Magellan shows up.
Right, 1521, the year everyone says the Philippines was discovered. But of course, that's way off. He bumped into a civilization that had been thriving for ages.
And he wasn't exactly a welcome guest either. Everyone knows the story of Lapu-Lapu and the Battle of Mactan. Magellan may have claimed the islands for Spain, but it cost him his life.
That perfectly captures how Filipinos resisted foreign control even back then. Mactan wasn't just a fight, it was a statement. They weren't going to just give up their land.
It's easy to forget those early acts of defiance when we're talking about centuries of colonialism. But that resistance was already there right from the start.
Yeah, and that fighting spirit would be crucial for what came later in the Philippines. But hold on, before we get to that, gotta tell you about that floating city I mentioned.
Oh yeah, you can't just drop a floating city and not explain.
It was Bohol, nicknamed the Venice of the Visayas. This wasn't some tiny village on rafts. Imagine a whole city on water, houses, markets, even a church. It showed how creative and skilled pre-colonial Filipinos were. Sadly, it was destroyed by soldiers from the Sultanate of Ternate.
A floating city destroyed. That's such a striking image. What a loss.
It really is.
Right.
But it also reminds us of the amazing things Filipinos were doing back then. They were innovators, builders, skilled sailors, creating societies that thrived in these unique, challenging environments.
It's a side of Philippine history we don't always hear enough about.
Absolutely. But understanding that foundation is key to appreciating what came next. The Spanish arrival wasn't just a beginning, it was a disruption, a turning point in a story that had already been going on for centuries.
And that turning point, with Miguel Lopez de Legazpi in 1565, that's where we'll pick up next time, as we get into the Spanish colonial era in the Philippines.
Last time we left off with Miguel Lopez de Legazpi landing in 1565, and that's where Spanish colonial rule really kicks off, a huge part of Philippine history, over 300 years of it.
Over 300 years, wow. How did they even manage to gain control of, well, all those islands?
Legazpi, he started setting up settlements, first in Cebu, then in 1571 he makes Manila the capital. Smart move, actually. Manila, right on Manila Bay, perfect for trade, perfect to run things from.
So they had their base in Manila, but did the rest of the Philippines just, go along with it?
Not quite. Remember those powerful sultanates in the south? They fought hard against the Spanish, trying to take over, impose their religion. These clashes, the Spanish-Moro Wars, went on for centuries.
Centuries? That's insane. What kept that resistance going for so long?
The sultanates, especially Maguindanao and Sulu, they were used to being independent, had a strong Islamic identity. They weren't about to just become part of a Spanish Catholic empire. No way. These were skilled warriors, knew how to fight at sea, constantly pushing back against the Spanish.
So you've got this constant fight in the South, but what about the rest of the Philippines? How did everyday life change for Filipinos under the Spanish, outside those sultanates?
Spain wanted to make the Philippines into like a mirror of their own society and religion. They brought in a whole new hierarchy with the Principalia. This was a class of local elites, basically given power and perks in exchange for being loyal to Spain.
So the Principalia, they were kind of like middlemen between the Spanish rulers and the Filipino people.
Exactly. They were the ones collecting taxes, keeping things in order, making sure Spanish rules were followed. This system, while it used some existing social structures, it ultimately helped the Spanish stay in control.
What about religion? We talked about Islam spreading before the Spanish, but then Catholicism comes in. How did that happen?
Spreading Catholicism was a big deal for Spain. They felt like it was their job to convert everyone to Christianity. So friars were sent all over, setting up missions, building churches, actively trying to convert Filipinos.
So a total religious shift. Did Filipinos just accept this new religion, though?
It was complicated, really. Some people, they welcomed it, saw it as a way to get an education or climb the social ladder. Others held on to their old beliefs or mixed Catholicism in with their existing practices. But there was definitely pushback, too, especially from those who saw the church as just another tool for Spanish control.
Makes sense. It's never simple when one culture tries to force its beliefs on another.
Absolutely. And we can't forget one of the most impactful things the Spanish did, which was bringing in private property. Before that, land was mostly communal. But the Spanish, they brought their own system, and that had some lasting consequences.
What were the consequences of changing to private property like that?
Well, it meant land ended up concentrated in the hands of a few, usually the Principalia. They were the ones who benefited. Traditional farming practices got disrupted, and a lot of Filipinos lost the land they had always considered theirs, becoming tenants or laborers on land they used to own. This period is where you see the roots of social and economic inequality start to grow, and these tensions, they still exist today.
So it wasn't just political and religious control. The Spanish were changing the whole foundation of Filipino society, their relationship with the land.
Exactly. And even with all their ambitions, the Philippines wasn't exactly a gold mine for Spain. Actually, quite the opposite.
Wait, really? I always figured colonies were all about making the mother country rich.
That was the idea. But the Philippines was more like a money pit. They were always at war, not just with the Moros in the south, but also fighting off Dutch and Japanese pirates. These constant battles drained their resources.
So not the cash cow they hoped for. But their influence was still everywhere in Filipino society, right?
Oh, without a doubt. You can see the Spanish influence in everything from the language to the food to the art and architecture. And even with all the hardships, a distinct Filipino identity starts to form, blending local traditions with Spanish influence.
And this is when the Ilustrados come in, right? The new generation of Filipinos starting to question Spanish rule.
Exactly. The Ilustrados were the educated elite. The opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 gave them a way to travel to Europe. They were exposed to these new ideas: liberty, democracy, self-determination. Those ideas really resonated with them, and when they came back to the Philippines, they brought those ideas with them, sparking a movement for reform and eventually independence.
Sounds like the seeds of revolution were being planted. Who were some of the key figures in this movement?
One major figure was José Rizal, a writer, doctor, and intellectual. He became like a symbol of Filipino nationalism. His novels, Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo, they exposed all the injustice of Spanish rule and inspired a lot of Filipinos.
So Rizal's writing was kind of a turning point, giving a voice to that desire for change.
Extremely influential. And when the Spanish executed him in 1896, it only made Filipinos even more determined. Things were already tense after stuff like the Cavite Mutiny, when Filipino soldiers rebelled against their Spanish officers. This all leads to the Cry of Pugad Loan, the event that officially marked the beginning of the Philippine Revolution.
So finally a revolution, fighting for freedom from Spain. But history rarely goes in a straight line. What was the Spanish-American War's role in all this?
Ah, yes. The Spanish-American War, fought mainly over Cuba, had a huge impact on the Philippines. The U.S., wanting to be a world power, saw a chance to grab some Spanish colonies. In a major battle, the U.S. Navy wiped out the Spanish fleet in Manila Bay, and that victory, that's what sets the stage for a whole new chapter. The U.S. replaces Spain as the main power in the Philippines.
And that's where we have to pause for now. The fight for independence from Spain takes a big turn as the Philippines ends up under a new power, the United States. So the Philippines fought so hard to get free from Spain, only to end up under American rule. What a crazy turn of events. Did Filipinos welcome this, or was there more resistance?
It was a tough thing for many Filipinos to accept. They had fought for independence, and now they had a new colonial power. And it wasn't peaceful at all. The Philippine-American War broke out in 1899, and it was a brutal conflict that went on for years.
Another war for independence, this time against the Americans. What was that like?
It was different from the fight against the Spanish. Filipinos, led by people like Emilio Aguinaldo, used guerrilla tactics. They knew the land and had experience resisting colonial powers.
Guerrilla warfare against a powerful military like the U.S., that must have been an incredible challenge.
It was a real David and Goliath situation. Filipinos fought bravely, but the U.S. military had much stronger weapons and resources. They used some brutal tactics, too, things like scorched earth policies and concentration camps.
Sounds devastating. How long did this war go on?
Officially, the fighting ended in 1902, but some resistance continued for a few years after that. The Philippines was definitely under U.S. control, and their hopes for independence were put on hold again.
So a new phase of colonial rule begins. How did the Americans govern the Philippines? Was it the same as what the Spanish had done?
There were some key differences. The Americans, while definitely looking out for their own interests, they did introduce some progressive reforms. They created a public school system aiming to educate Filipinos and teach them American values. They put money into infrastructure, fixing up the port of Manila, building a tram network in the capital to make transportation better, and they gradually moved toward a system where Filipinos could govern themselves, with the idea of eventually granting them independence.
So a mix of self-interest and progressive ideas. Sounds familiar from other colonial situations, but did the Americans really plan to give the Philippines independence?
Yeah, they did eventually. The Jones Law of 1916 specifically promised independence would come someday. And then in 1934, the Tydings-McDuffie Act set the stage for creating the Commonwealth of the Philippines. This was a kind of semi-autonomous government with a 10-year transition period before full independence was supposed to happen.
That Commonwealth era sounds like a time of hope for Filipinos, a chance to finally control their own future after so many years of colonial rule.
It was a hopeful time. The Commonwealth government, led by people like Manuel Quezon, they started these ambitious nation-building projects. They wrote a constitution, worked on developing the economy, strengthened democratic institutions, all to get ready for full independence. There was a lot of optimism, a feeling that a new era was about to begin for the Philippines.
But then World War II happened, and that must have changed everything. What was the war's impact on the Philippines?
The Philippines, caught in the middle of this global conflict, really suffered. The Japanese invasion in 1941 led to a brutal occupation. Filipinos and American forces fought hard together, but they were overpowered in the end. The Bataan Death March, this horrific event where thousands of Filipino and American prisoners of war were forced to march for miles in terrible conditions, it became a symbol of just how brutal that war was.
A truly dark time for the Philippines. But did they ever recover from all of this and finally get the independence they had been promised?
Yes, they did. After the war ended in 1946, the Republic of the Philippines was finally established. Manuel Roxas became the first president, marking the start of a new era. It was a hard-won victory, achieved after decades of struggle and sacrifice.
What an incredible journey. From pre-colonial societies to Spanish rule, then American control, and finally independence. But even after independence, I'm sure there were more challenges ahead.
Of course, independence brought new challenges. Rebuilding after the war, setting up a stable government, dealing with Cold War politics, and trying to fix those deep social and economic problems left over from colonialism.
And the story keeps going. with the Marcos era, the People Power Revolution, and all the presidents who came after, each dealing with their own issues.
Exactly. The Philippines has had its successes and its setbacks, just like any other nation. But throughout its history, one thing has remained constant: the resilience of the Filipino people. They've faced so many obstacles, natural disasters, political turmoil, but their spirit never breaks. Their story is about adaptation, perseverance, and always striving for a better future.
A great reminder that history is never simple. It's like a tapestry, woven with both dark and light threads. The story of the Philippines is a testament to that enduring human spirit, our ability to bounce back, and our constant hope for a brighter tomorrow. As we wrap up our deep dive into the history of the Philippines, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
I'd say this. The next time you hear someone oversimplifying the story of the Philippines, remember how complex it is, how much depth there is, and how resilient the Filipino people are. Dig deeper, question what you think you know, and you'll discover these amazing untold stories that make their history so fascinating.
What a perfect way to end our discussion. The Philippines has such a vibrant past and a dynamic present, and their story is far from over. So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep discovering the amazing world of Philippine history.